All right, I had mentioned that hydration was really important, and this is because doctors think that we need enough fluid to have normal motility. And so a lot of people with stomach issues, it will, if they're not drinking enough water, it will cause the whole processing of the meal to slow down. And then they're more likely to have reflux because they're not digesting things and moving them through the system promptly, in an optimal way. So make sure you're drinking enough, but you don't want to drink in ways that are going to make your reflux worse or your heartburn or stomach issue worse. So I'd say this is really fine-tuning things, but it's better to sip, not gulp, especially during meals. A lot of problems with digestion, like people who are prone to H. pylori, are sometimes guilty of this, is that they might be drinking a lot of fluids with the meal, and that's diluting your stomach acid. And so it's better to kind of limit things that you're drinking to meals. I usually tell people like 8 ounces or less. Some people maybe even only 4 ounces during a meal if they're really having issues with their stomach. And then also think about just drinking plain fluids rather than drinking things that are caffeinated or have alcohol, which is going to dehydrate you. All right, so that was a bunch of information about what to eat, what not to eat. I hope that provides some guidance to get you going. Next, what I would do is think about soothing the stomach lining. Uh, a lot of times people's stomach is very sensitive because it's just very irritated from the history of having the digestive issue or the GERD. And so it can be very helpful to do a combination like this one. This GI Revive is a glutamine supplement. It also has deglycerized licorice in it, and zinc carnosine, a number of different things that really help soothe and repair the gut lining, including leaky gut, but also like a very aggravated esophageal lining. And so many times I'll have people take this formula after meals or before meals if they've got reflux, just to give them something over the counter that's very soothing, and that helps kind of begin to control the inflammation they're having. You can also do foods that are very lubricating in different teas, marshmallow root preparations, licorice, although I would only use the DGL or deglycerized licorice for people, especially people that are prone to high blood pressure. You don't want to be taking licorice long term, but you can take DGL. And different sources of fiber that can kind of help with motility and moistening and lubricating things can be good for the gut lining too, and for that person that's just very sensitive and has a really inflamed stomach lining. So after you change the diet and think about things to soothe the gut lining, it's kind of time for us to work on restoring digestive secretions. And sometimes I will do all these steps at the same time, but I think you all can kind of appreciate how in some cases you have to do one thing at a time, and people might want to see how one intervention is working at a time and then move on to the next thing and kind of add things in layers. So hypochlorhydria or low stomach acid is kind of a growing area, that the medical studies are supporting is responsible for a lot of cases of acid reflux. And you can read about it in an article like this, where they're kind of talking about how people in my field in functional medicine have been supplementing with something for stomach acid forever to help people. Well, not forever, but for a long time. And so basically, you want to have optimum digestion, where I was talking about signaling that acid bath, and then have it be complete and finish and move the food through. The longer the food is sitting in the stomach with very slow digestion, the more likely someone is to have reflux. And so I mentioned that a high carbohydrate diet seems to make that much worse for people. And I think that the primary reason for that is that the high carbohydrate diet is dampening the stomach acid and kind of preventing things from moving. So you take that carbohydrate away and you're eating protein and veggies, things go through much better, and all the signaling works better. So this is a figure from this last publication that I showed you talking about stomach acid. So it's kind of cool. The green line here is young people, a young population, young adults. And the blue line is older, an older population. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the graph, but I think the takeaway here is that there's a big difference between an old population and a young population. And we're seeing that we don't see as acidic of a pH in the old population. As we're getting older, our ability to make the stomach acid declines, and that can co-occur with having more stomach issues. And so I hope my title isn't confusing here. What I mean is, by the stomach acid levels declining with age, is that our ability to make as much stomach acid is going down, and our stomach acid actually is not as strong. So what I propose with people that I find really help is that they use things to stimulate stomach acid. So at its most simplest, you can do sea salt and lemon juice and apple cider vinegar. These are very gentle things that work sometimes when the stomach issue is very mild. For chronic, more serious digestive issues, or things that are just unresolved, I like to use a supplement called betaine hydrochloride, which is from beets, that really helps to signal the stomach acid production. And so, converse to this idea of thinking we have to suppress stomach acid to get relief, actually increasing stomach acid helps because it helps to close the esophageal sphincter and keep the acid out of the esophagus and have things process in the stomach and then go on. Um, it can also help, like I said, to avoid drinking a lot of fluids or gulping a lot of fluids with the meal because that works against the stomach acid production. Now, sometimes when I do this with someone, they are still very aggravated. They don't like vinegar. They don't like betaine HCl. And some of you listening might say, well, I tried betaine and like that did not work at all for me. That's If that happens, that means you need to go back to step two and do more to reduce the inflammation in the lining. It often also means you really need to test and understand what is driving your stomach problem, because a lot of times people can have an H. pylori overgrowth and that needs to be addressed, or something similar, some other bug in the gut that needs to be addressed and treated before they're really ready to move on and get things to digest healthfully again. It can be important to work on things that promote bile flow and liver support. So more fats in the diet in general are good for this. Different herbs help with bile flow. This will show up for the person who gets acid reflux when they eat high fat food. So if you eat a lot of nuts and you feel pretty sick, or you eat a high fat food, you know who you are, and you get sick, that means you need help with bile flow. And there's a number of different supplements, beets, taurine, ox bile, prunes. I mean, there's just a lot of different things you can do here, but it's kind of a matter of finding the thing that helps promote the bile flow for that person. Sometimes I use a digestive enzyme combination to support the pancreatic enzyme piece of good digestion. And this formula is an example of a combo formula, which you can often find where you've got stomach acid support, you've got a very low dose betaine HCl, you've got bile flow, and you've got enzymes. And so that can work really well for someone in the beginning. And then sometimes what I do is increase the dosing of the betaine over time to get them to where they feel like their digestive system's working really well again. Another thing that can often come up with acid reflux and stomach issues is histamine intolerance. So histamine intolerance is a growing field in medicine. Here's kind of a bigger review. Histamine intolerance, the more we know, the less we know. It's like, as doctors, it can be very challenging to work with someone who has histamine intolerance because they're very sensitive and the science is not as thorough as we really need it to be in terms of understanding things. But there still are a lot of interventions that help someone that's got a lot of histamine issues. And acid reflux can be an example of that, that's driven by histamine. It's not driven by stomach acid directly. It's not necessarily driven by what the person, like a strong food sensitivity, um, and or some of these other things I've talked about. Histamine is a chemical that the immune system makes when it's aggravated, and some of us lack the ability to break down histamine quickly, or might have a situation in our gut biome where the biome is adding a lot of histamine. Sometimes genetically, people just don't break histamine down. Maybe they're not methylating very well, and that can affect histamine layers. So high histamine can show up as GERD, it can show up as insomnia, it can show up as a lot of different chronic symptoms, chronic allergies being like the most obvious one, SIBO. So anyway, its relationship to the stomach happens when the body is releasing a lot of histamine, it can promote the stomach acid cells. And this is a case where a stomach issue isn't happening from some of the other things I talked about. It's more directly happening because of a histamine reaction. And so in this case, a person will get a lot of relief from an antihistamine or natural antihistamines. So there are natural things that you can take instead of just over-the-counter antihistamines to help. But I wanted to mention that because sometimes I find, especially in a really tricky case, that the histamine is the issue behind someone's chronic stomach issue, rather than some of these other more common things like dietary changes. Although I would say, like doing the body tune-up, doing a low-carb diet will help someone typically who has histamine intolerance. So all the things are still related. It's still good to work on proper digestive secretions if you've got histamine intolerance. It's still good to work on gut lining and healthy gut biota. Okay, then the last step would be, or maybe the first step, depending on the person, would be doing some special assessments to try to gauge what's going on. I can look at someone's blood chemistry, like their comprehensive metabolic panel, and see, do they look like they're making enough stomach acid, or is that a problem? Are they one of these low stomach acid people? Um, Similarly, we can do food sensitivity panels. And the test I really like to do for a chronic digestive system that's not responding to anything else is a GI map stool test by Diagnostic Solutions. It's very sensitive. It's going to count every cell in the stool and look at the DNA. So rather than trying to culture something or look for your antibody reaction, it's actually just looking at the DNA of what's in your stool sample from your gut. I find the information is always very relevant and it's very comprehensive too. We get a lot of information about the good and the bad and all the secretions. And so it really helps create a targeted program. Here's an example of the last page in a GI map. It's many pages long when you get the results, but this tells me different markers like steatocrit tells me about their bioflow. Elastase 1 tells me about pancreatic enzyme. Beta-glucuronidase tells me about the ability to detoxify the gut. Secretory IgA is the immune response marker. Anti-gliadin IgA is a gluten sensitivity marker. It also measures inflammation and has markers for leaky gut. So you just kind of get more information. Do we need to be zeroing in on leaky gut or do we more need to be focusing on something else? Okay, so to summarize, we talked about different changes in the diet, with most of the evidence today supporting a low carbohydrate diet as being one of the interventions that can be very powerful. We talked about different supplements, especially supplements that promote healing of the gut lining, soothing that gut lining, and then supplements that help stimulate digestive secretions to work with your body to balance things. And then we talked about some of the different tests you can do to identify more about the underlying issues if you're not getting relief from dietary change or from supplements. Here's a picture of my book again, The Body Tune-Up. So like I said, I use this with people a lot when they have issues with stomach acid and reflux, even silent reflux, GERD, heartburn. And I typically do find that they get relief within the week of starting the diet. So it can be very effective. You can get copies through me at humannaturellc.com. They're also online, like at Amazon, and you can get copies at A Room of One's Own in Madison.